Welcome everyone, I'm LonelPhiX, and this is something new. Throughout the year, I'll play and review a bunch of games in depth, but the one thing I never really had a good way to quantify is how much I recommend a game, other than, just saying I do or don't recommend it. That's when I had an idea. In the process of organizing the games that I recommend the most, let's help each other out with some Christmas shopping. I want to go through the 5 games this year that I recommend you buy the most, and down below, you'll find links that you can use to buy any of the 5 games on console. Hopefully, my recommendations will help you find something that you want to buy for Christmas this year, and I will get a cut every time you buy something with one of my links, which enables me to do my Christmas shopping. The rules for which games can make the list are simple. Only games that I have already beaten and either have reviewed or plan to review qualify for this list, and the game must have released this year. Let's kick things off with one of my personal favorites in 2023, number 5, Dead Space Remake. The game is the 2023 remake of the 2008 third-person horror game, Dead Space, and it is, in my opinion, one of the single best things that EA has ever produced. It would have been all too easy to modify the game to milk every single last monetization opportunity out of players, but in a genuinely surprising twist, EA didn't do that. Instead, what we got was a full, finished, quality product on launch, which honors and improves upon the original with very little compromise. That said, Dead Space is an M for Mature third-person sci-fi horror title that is infamous for its frantic, gory approach to gaming horror, so if you're a mom or dad on this video looking for games to buy for your kids, this one, in particular, is definitely not it. This is by a huge margin, even among the other M for Mature rated games on here, the most mature rated game on here. And children should absolutely not be playing it. In terms of what the game is actually like, you play as Isaac Clarke, an engineer who is sent with a small team to answer a distress call by the USG Ishimura. While trying to repair the ship's facilities, you discover the station has been overrun by necromorphs, the mutated living corpses of the crew, along with discovering a conspiracy involving both the ship's upper brass and the leaders of a cult who believe that the necromorphs are the heralds of the afterlife, in which we will all be one in mind, body, and soul. And while in most horror games the zombie equivalent would be dropped in a few well-placed headshots, the necromorphs are very unique in that they can survive with entire parts of their bodies missing. Therefore, the only way to actually stop them isn't to try and kill them, it's to immobilize them. Using your various engineering tools that you've managed to repurpose as weapons, you need to dismember the necromorphs if you have any hope for survival. While I did like Dead Space Remake a lot, and the game's incredible, I can't put it higher on this list just by virtue of the fact that it's really hard to recommend to you. With how violent and gory the gameplay is, not to mention with how disturbing some may find some of the themes in it, its audience is going to be reasonably limited. Even still, if you enjoy horror games and you're old enough to play it, I strongly recommend trying out this game. Dead Space Remake is available on PS5, Xbox Series, and Steam. Number 4, Metroid Prime Remastered. 2023 is the year where I think we all realize that many of the best games have already been made, so we're just taking what we had and making them better. Like, for example, Metroid Prime Remastered. Metroid Prime was originally released on the GameCube in 2002, and technically was already remastered once when it re-released in the Metroid Prime Trilogy Collection on Wii. However, in the lead-up for the series' long-awaited return in Metroid Prime 4, Nintendo gave us a polished version of the original game in the series. Metroid Prime is a T for Teen sci-fi first-person shooter adventure game famous and beloved by fans of the Metroid franchise for bringing it into 3D for the first time. In it, you play as Samus Aran, who, after the destruction of the space pirate frigate over the planet of Talon 4, must restore the functions of her now-destroyed armor while uncovering the secret plot of the space pirates and their research. The gameplay largely revolves around exploring the various locales of Talon 4 while using your scan visor to learn every little detail that you can from your environment. You can scan enemies to learn more about their physiology, behaviors, and weaknesses, while also scanning inscriptions on walls to determine the history and lore of the ruins around you. All the while, you'll be hunting down your presumed dead nemesis Ridley and putting a stop to whatever the space pirates are doing before escaping the planet. Metroid Prime Remastered takes all of that and then adds a new layer of polish, updating the various models and textures while also giving the players access to additional content and options like concept art, models, and new control schemes. Metroid Prime Remastered is arguably the second easiest game on this list to recommend, only being beaten out in that regard by number 1. The game is largely inoffensive, and all the violence is sci-fi and cartoonish enough to not be concerning enough for kids, although the Chozo ghosts definitely scared me out of playing the game when I was like 7 or 8, but we'll gloss over that. It's a classic for a reason, and despite the fact that other games on this list scored higher than it, and I think they might be better, Metroid Prime Remastered is absolutely something that deserves to be on this list. Metroid Prime Remastered is available for Nintendo Switch. Number 3. Resident Evil 4 Remake. Another third-person horror game, but this time, one that takes itself much less seriously. Also, this is the last remake/remaster on this list. The next two in the honorable mention are all legitimately brand new, I swear. Resident Evil 4 is an M for Mature rated third-person shooter horror game with more of an emphasis on the action than the horror. Most of the time, anyway. It was originally released by Capcom in 2005 for the Nintendo GameCube, but has since been ported to play on basically everything from modern consoles to your smart fridge, along with League of Legends and the original Doom. It's much more of a campy horror action movie vibe than something like Dead Space is, complete with cheesy one-liners and cliché villainous monologues. You play as Leon Kennedy, who has been sent on a special ops mission to rescue the president's daughter from cultists who have kidnapped her and taken her somewhere to the remote regions of Spain. Along the way, you'll find that many of the villagers, animals, and suits of armor for some reason have been infected with a parasite used by the Los Iluminados cult in an attempt to bring world peace through total control. In the process of saving the president's daughter and snuffing out the cult's plot to save the world, you'll fight a giant fish, befriend a certified good boy, and kill it with fire! RE4 Remake rebuilds the 2005 classic from the ground up, just like Dead Space Remake did, with massively updated visuals, a brand new game engine, new weapons, and new content. But more importantly, because it's less focused on the visceral gore, and because the original has been much more widely considered to be a must-have classic anyway, it is much easier for me to recommend to you. Where Dead Space really shouldn't be played by anyone under the age of 18, you can certainly get away with that a lot more in terms of Resident Evil 4 Remake. Resident Evil 4 Remake is available on Xbox Series, PS5, PS4, and Steam. Number 2. Baldur's Gate 3. Can we talk about the fact that number 3 was a 4 in the series and number 2 is a 3 in the series? I just need to... Anyway, Baldur's Gate 3 is a very, very different kind of game from everything else on this list. And not just because it isn't a sort of shooter. The game essentially does everything in its power to translate the experience of playing the famous tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons into a video game context. Baldur's Gate 3 is an M for Mature fantasy Western RPG set in the world of the real-life D&D book, The Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. In it, you build your character just as you would in D&D, choosing a class, race, and background, among other things, that all allow your character to play and look exactly the way that you'd want them to. Through that character, you'll then explore, make allies, cast spells, and most importantly, roll dice! With this game essentially being a Sword Coast D&D campaign, you play it in much the same way that you would the tabletop game. If you want to do something, roll me a d20 and see how well you do. This applies to any skill or check in the game, although it has been streamlined a lot to make the experience more efficient. Say, for example, you no longer need to manually roll saving throws to dodge explosions, or roll to see if your attacks will hit or how much damage they do. All of those are just done automatically now. Baldur's Gate 3 is a great game that I admittedly have some split opinions on, but regardless of how the game makes me feel, it's very easy for me to recommend to fans of both D&D and Western RPGs in general for one very specific reason. It is by a massive, enormous margin the best bang for your buck on this list. At the time of this video, my review for Baldur's Gate 3 hasn't come out yet, but where the last 3 games took anywhere between 12 to 18 hours to beat each, my first playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 took me 125 hours. The game is absolutely gargantuan, and the depth to the number of choices that you can make and how they will go based on how you roll, along with how you build your party, all ensures that no playthrough will ever exactly be the same. While I do have to give a content warning that there are some adult scenes you can find, but are not required for the critical path, the game is certainly less adult than either Dead Space or Resident Evil 4, especially in the violence department. With that said, Baldur's Gate 3 is currently available for PS5 and Steam, with an Xbox Series release coming in December. Also, a quick caveat, because normally this is just where we move to the next section, Baldur's Gate 3 is the only game on this list that currently doesn't have any physical release to speak of, so if you want to buy it on PS5 instead of Steam, you're going to need to buy it on the PlayStation Store. So instead of having links taking you to a hard copy of the game, they'll take you to a gift card that gives you the amount you need to buy the game on the store. Sorry for the inconvenience, it kinda just is what it is. And before we get to number 1, I want to give an honorable mention to a game that I felt really passionate about this year. Lies of P. It's a dark Victorian clockwork punk retelling of the story of Pinocchio through the lens of a Souls-like of all things. In terms of gameplay, it feels very much like a love letter to From Software, the studio behind Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and the Sekiro franchises, by virtue of the fact that it combines the gameplay mechanics of all three. It has the hallmarks of a Souls-like, with its own equivalents to Souls, bonfires, and all the same stat progressions, with the aggressive playstyle of Bloodborne and the parry mechanics of Sekiro. Lies of P is far and away one of the most fun Souls-like games I've ever beaten, and if you like the difficulty and feel of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, or Sekiro, then I recommend you check it out for yourself. Lies of P is available on Xbox Series, PS5, PS4, and Steam. Now without further ado, number 1. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel to a little-known game called Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, which you've probably never heard of because, I mean, it's only the 20th best-selling game of all time. Tears is also a game that might be pointless to recommend to you, seeing how most of you already have it, having been confirmed by Nintendo as the single fastest-selling Legend of Zelda game literally ever. But enough about hype, let's talk video games. Tears of the Kingdom is a low fantasy adventure game wherein, after discovering the long-dormant remains of Ganondorf, a full-powered Link from the last game is confronted by his allegedly long-dead nemesis, and stripped of all of his prior game's ability... Wait, didn't we already do Metroid Prime? That was number 4, right? He then wakes up to find his arm has been replaced with that of the former Hyrulean king, which grants him an entirely new set of abilities. Using his new powers to manipulate his surroundings to his advantage, he sets out to restore the Master Sword, unite Hyrule against Ganondorf's army, and put an end to the cycle once and for all. For those who know anything about Breath of the Wild, Tears arguably fixes that game's biggest flaw. In an attempt to be the truest realization of the original vision for the very first Zelda game, Breath of the Wild was unlike any Legend of Zelda game in nearly 20 years, becoming an adventure game entirely built around freedom over formula. Tears of the Kingdom takes that foundation of freedom and then balances it out by adding back in elements of the Zelda formula that fans have grown to love over the years. Things like proper dungeons, although fairly short, make their return in Tears of the Kingdom. The game also has a critical path, where although the order in which some things are done doesn't necessarily matter, there are still some challenges that the player is required to face before beating the game. All of which will culminate in a final boss, which shows the most lore-accurate rendition of Ganondorf in the series and connects it all the way back to Skyward Sword, the very first Legend of Zelda game in the canon. And, oh yeah, did I mention, the map is more than literally twice as big as it was in Breath of the Wild. Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom is an adventure for all ages, full of exploration, boss fights, puzzles, and set pieces that is extremely easy to recommend. If you like Legend of Zelda, if you like games with creativity tools that let you create your own solutions to problems, if you like adventure games, or you're just a fan of Nintendo in general, Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom is a must-have for your Nintendo Switch collection. And there you have it. Out of the games that I've reviewed this year, these are the ones that I recommend you take a look at yourself. What are your thoughts? What are some games this year that you would recommend someone get for the holidays? Let me know in the comments below, and until then, I have been LoneWolfVX, and I will see you, yes you, next time.